Let me ask you a question. What's one thing you've done recently to promote a safety culture? Now think about that question long and hard before answering. Is it that you've taken steps to reinforce a safety policy that's been neglected? Is it that you've conducted some safety observations and done some corrective actions around that? Or is it that you've engaged your workers in some remedial training on safe work practices? Well, if your answer was something along those lines, then let me suggest that you may be doing a great job in promoting compliance, but you may not have graduated yet to promoting a safety culture. Safety compliance is not opposed to safety culture, and in fact, safety culture assumes safety compliance is already firmly in place. But there is a difference between the two. And one way to communicate to frontline leaders and frontline employees the relationship between those two things, between compliance on the one hand and culture on the other, is by creating an analogy around a very common safety goal that's embraced by nearly every industrial organization that exists today. Namely, our goal is to send everyone home safe every day. Now, we've already discussed in past video blogs how to tie safety as a core value to other core values they already hold. And we saw there that this is easily done once we recognize the common core values people tend to embrace for themselves, their families, their spouses, their kids, their grandkids, their friends. In a word, the relationships with the people they love, who love them, and who depend on them to make the right decisions every day. Let's put that into a picture, and let's let that picture represent what our goal is, both literally and symbolically. And that goal is the path home. Every day, the goal for all of us is the same: to get back to the real world of real relationships that we value most. But what if along the way to our destination we encounter an obstacle that prevents us from getting there safely? What are some ways we could overcome this obstacle to continue on to our destination? Well, we could get a long pole and pole vault to the other side. The problem with that is we don't know for sure just how deep that water is. And we wouldn't know until we've committed to that course of action, and by then it would be too late to reverse it. So obviously that's not going to be the best solution here. Or we could climb down the wall of the cliff, swim to the other side, or perhaps take a boat, then scale the wall on the opposite side to reach the top and continue along our path. The problem here again is all three of those actions are risky. The cliff walls are high and we could fall on the way down or on the way up on the other side, and that water looks pretty rough for swimming or even boating. The third option is to lay a plank across the span of the two sides that would then allow us to walk across to the other side. We may be able to get across this way, but walking across a single plank would obviously be risky. We could easily fall through no fault of our own. So let's add a few more planks here. This is a safer scenario, and we may be able to get across this way, but there are still some problems with it. If the planks were wet, for instance, or a strong gust of wind kicked up, we could still slip or lose our balance and fall over the edge. So let's add some guardrails to the mix. Will this do it for us? Well, yeah, the infrastructure is now in place to allow us to walk across safely so that we can continue down our path. Think of this bridge we've built as our compliance to safety regulations. The regulation is put in place, much like our bridge, to create a safe working environment so that under normal conditions, if I comply with the regulation, I can be reasonably sure I'm not going to get hurt and I can continue along the path home to get back to those I love. It can guard me against the environment and changing conditions, but there's still something it cannot guard me against. It can't guard me against my own behaviors. It can't guard me against the decisions I make. It can't guard me against myself. This bridge or any other compliance regulation can keep me safe if I walk across it. But it can't prevent me from, say, hopping on top of one of those rails and trying to get across that way. So while compliance regulations are absolutely essential for creating a safe condition, they're entirely powerless to prevent me from engaging in foolish behaviors or from making foolish decisions. But what if I view the regulation in a different way? The problem is we tend to see the regulation in its final policy form, completely detached from its origin. How did it come to be a regulation in the first place? For instance, a typical fall protection policy might read this way. We see it here only in its final, polished, and sterile form. But what if instead we saw it the way it was originally written? Obviously, reading it this way brings the culture element back into sharp focus. The regulation was originally written not in ink, but in someone's blood. Someone got hurt or killed, and the regulation came about as a result of that. Now, I'm certainly not the first one to point out the fact that OSHA standards are written in blood. That's a pretty common saying. But it's a truth that bears repeating in as graphic a way as possible to remind us that compliance to safety regulations is not opposed to safety culture, and in fact is the foundation for that culture. So there in a nutshell is the relationship between compliance and culture. Compliance is the foundation, but our goal must always be to move beyond that foundation of compliance in our focus, in our thinking, in our way of communicating, and in our way of leading safety until we form a true values-based safety culture. Until next time, be sure all your safety initiatives are built in, not bolted on.